Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Sally's drastic action in response to Chelsea's alarming news. Claire Newman will issue a warning, while Chelsea Lawson will receive some disturbing news. On the CBS soap opera, a lot will happen as Sally Spectra gets ready to do something drastic. First, after asking Claire if they can press the reset button, Kyle Abbott will wait for her response. Claire can't ignore the hurt caused by Kyle's recent betrayals and erratic behavior, much as she would like to. Claire might say that Kyle can't be hoping for a quick fix here and caution that it's not that easy. Rebuilding trust will require time and effort if Kyle and Claire are to have a successful relationship. Nevertheless, Claire can counter that Kyle can take certain actions to advance their reconciliation. To begin, Kyle should distance himself from Holden Novak and acknowledge that Claire is free to spend time with whoever she chooses. According to Y&R spoilers, Kyle may reassure Claire that he would trust her judgment on Holden because he will need to suppress some bad emotions during Tuesday's show. Kyle may pledge to take a step back even though his instincts will still be telling him to keep Claire safe. When it comes to Billy Abbott's relationship with Kane Ashby, Sally will go to great lengths to prove her point. Billy proposed that all he needed to do was threaten Victor Newman with this AI program to get him to do what he wants. But Sally doesn't think that intimidating Victor would work, and she also doesn't think that Kane is trustworthy. Kane intends to covertly maintain control of the AI software after it is turned over, therefore Sally's worries are justified. Although Billy may believe he is in charge, Kane will actually be in charge of what the software performs. Even if Sally won't be aware of that strategy, she will nonetheless recognize the possibility of disaster. Because of this, Sally will eventually believe that harsh measures are necessary to save Billy from himself. It appears that Sally will provide Diane Abbott with updates on the problem first, even if she may believe that Jack Abbott is her greatest chance for help. Chelsea will be alarmed by Adam Newman in the interim. Adam is likely to acknowledge that he discussed with Victor the possibility of scoring the AI program and putting it to the test on Abbott communications. Adam was certain he could win Chelsea over, but after he presents the plan, she will have some reservations. Chelsea might feel a little bad about throwing a wrench in Billy's media firm and believe there are numerous ways things could go wrong. Adam should be able to persuade Chelsea to change her mind, though, as she has been a bit more Team Newman lately. Sally Spectra was never one to sit idly by while chaos brewed around her, and on this particular week in Genoa City, chaos seemed to be the only currency being exchanged. Chelsea Lawson, with her sharp instincts and tendency to catch wind of unsettling truths before anyone else, had just received news that rattled her to the core, a revelation so disturbing that even her seasoned poker face faltered, and as she delivered the information to Sally, the fiery redhead felt a surge of adrenaline. Unlike anything she had experienced in months, for the warning Chelsea passed along was not one to be dismissed lightly. It was the kind of development that demanded a response, swift, bold, and yes, perhaps drastic. Claire Newman, navigating her own storm, had already been in the midst of issuing her own warning to Kyle Abbott, who had been naively hoping for a reset button moment in their strained relationship. But Claire, with her composure honed by heartbreak and her resolve hardened by betrayal, could not and would not allow Kyle's erratic behavior and careless choices to be swept under the rug as if a simple apology could erase the wounds he had inflicted. So she warned him that trust was not a faucet to be turned on and off at will, that rebuilding what he had shattered would require time, effort, and accountability. And though Kyle's instinct was to beg for immediate absolution, Claire countered with conditions. He must first distance himself from Holden Novak, stop allowing paranoia to dictate his every move, and most importantly, respect her autonomy, because Claire Newman refused to be controlled or caged by Kyle's insecurity. Kyle, for his part, swallowed hard and promised to trust her judgment, even as jealousy twisted in his gut, vowing aloud to suppress his protective instincts though inside he knew every fiber of his being would remain on high alert whenever Holden's name surfaced. Yet he was desperate enough for Claire's forgiveness to play the part of the reformed man she demanded, and so he made his pledge. Elsewhere, however, Sally's world was tilting toward danger as Billy Abbott grew increasingly intoxicated by the idea of leveraging the mysterious AI program as a weapon against Victor Newman, a scheme Sally saw as nothing short of reckless insanity, because threatening Victor was akin to poking a sleeping bear with a stick and pretending you wouldn't get mauled. But Billy, blind to the danger and eager for a shortcut to power. Insisted he had control of the situation, blind to the fact that Kane Ashby was orchestrating a silent coup behind his back, plotting to keep the AI software firmly within his grasp even after handing over a version to Billy, ensuring that Kane, not Billy, would be the one quietly pulling the strings of this dangerous technology. Sally, unaware of the full breadth of Kane's duplicity but keenly aware of his slippery nature, trusted her instincts enough to know Billy was playing with fire, and, though her words fell on deaf ears as Billy doubled down on his bravado, she realized with a sinking dread that persuasion alone would not be enough to divert him from this path of self-destruction, meaning it was time for her to take drastic action. Not just to protect Billy, but to prevent the entire Abbott family and possibly Genoa City itself from being ensnared in Kane's power grab. Her first move, surprisingly, was not to confront Jack Abbott, though Jack's wisdom and level-headedness made him the obvious choice, but rather to confide in Diane Jenkins Abbott, reasoning that Diane, with her complex loyalties and protective instincts for Kyle and Jack alike, might be the one willing to break through Billy's arrogance and make him see the danger he was courting. And though Diane herself was stunned by Sally's confession, she too felt the creeping unease that always accompanied Kane's name, realizing that the stakes were higher than even Sally knew. Meanwhile, Adam Newman had delivered his own bombshell to Chelsea, one that left her breathless and unsure whether to scream or remain silent. For Adam casually admitted that he had spoken to Victor about acquiring the AI program and testing its potential against Abbott Communications, spinning it as a tactical maneuver that would elevate the Newman empire and, at least in Adam's mind, impress Chelsea with his boldness. But instead of delight, Chelsea felt an icy dread seep into her bones, because sabotaging Billy's company was not just business, it was personal. And though she had stood on both sides of Billy's orbit before, something about this plan struck her as cruel, short-sighted, and ultimately dangerous for all involved. Guilt pricked at her conscience as she envisioned Billy's firm unraveling, and though part of her longed to keep her distance, the mother in her, the survivor in her, the woman who knew the consequences of unchecked ambition, could not ignore the warning bells ringing in her head. So she pressed Adam with questions, doubting the wisdom of this alliance with Victor, fearing that too many unseen pitfalls lurked ahead. Adam, suave as ever, countered her concerns with reassurances, painting visions of victory and power, reminding Chelsea how much easier it would be if she leaned into the Newman machine rather than resisted it. And though Chelsea wavered, torn between her loyalty to Adam and her lingering care for Billy, she could not fully silence her hesitation, and that hesitation, in turn, would ripple out in ways neither she nor Adam yet understood. For Sally, Chelsea's news was both a confirmation of her fears and a catalyst that spurred her into motion, the push she needed to escalate from warnings to action. And though the precise nature of her plan remained locked behind her fiery green eyes, there was no doubt that she was ready to gamble everything, her alliances, her reputation, even her safety, if it meant protecting Billy and preventing Kane and Victor from seizing control of a technology that could destroy lives and reshape the power dynamics of Genoa City forever. And as the storm clouds gathered over the Newmans, the Abbotts, and the restless souls caught in between, it became clear that Tuesday's episode would not simply be another day in the tangled lives of these families but the ignition point of a firestorm, one that would test loyalty, love, and the very boundaries of how far people were willing to go when the fate of everything they held dear hung in the balance. Sally Spectra's mind refused to rest after Chelsea's disturbing revelation, her thoughts looping like an endless reel of worst-case scenarios, each one darker than the last, because the truth Chelsea unearthed confirmed every instinct Sally had been desperately trying to articulate to Billy, only for him to wave her off with his usual mix of bravado and misplaced confidence. And though she admired Billy's fire, that daring streak that made him unpredictable, charming, and frustrating all at once, she also knew it was the same streak that led him into disasters he couldn't always claw his way out of. So Sally, heart-pounding, began to sketch out a plan that would force Billy to confront the reality he was ignoring, even if it meant betraying his trust in order to save him. Meanwhile, Kyle Abbott was still grappling with Claire Newman's cool, calculated response to his plea for a reset button, her words echoing in his head long after she had turned away, because Claire had made it abundantly clear that forgiveness was not a gift to be demanded, it was a reward to be earned through patience, transparency, and change. And while Kyle vowed to distance himself from Holden Novak, the very idea of another man hovering in Claire's orbit gnawed at him like a parasite, feeding on his insecurities, making him question whether he could truly keep the promise he had just made. But Claire, having been raised amidst the volatility of the Newman dynasty, had no tolerance for half measures. And though she still harbored feelings for Kyle, she was equally committed to proving to herself that she would not be dragged back into the same cycles of deceit and betrayal that had scarred her in the past. Elsewhere, Chelsea sat in the dim glow of her apartment, wrestling with Adam Newman's words, the swagger with which he spoke of partnering with Victor to unleash the AI program against Abbott Communications still hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. And though Adam's confidence was magnetic, Chelsea couldn't shake the feeling that he was underestimating the collateral damage. For Adam had a way of seeing the big picture, victory, dominance, prestige, while overlooking the fine details that tore families apart, and Chelsea, having been burned too many times by Adam's grandiose visions, felt her instincts screaming that this particular gamble was one they couldn't afford. Yet she also knew how difficult it was to derail Adam once his mind was made up, so she resolved to keep digging, to keep listening, even as the knowledge weighed heavily on her heart. Back at Abbott Manor, Sally debated how much to reveal to Diane Jenkins Abbott, because though Diane had become a stabilizing force in Jack's life, her loyalties were notoriously complicated, and Sally worried that if she laid all her cards on the table, Diane might twist the information in a way that benefited her own position rather than protecting Billy. Yet desperation overrode hesitation, and Sally finally confided in her, explaining how Billy's plan to leverage the AI program against Victor was not only reckless but suicidal, given Kane's manipulative presence in the background. And as Sally's words tumbled out in a rush, Diane's expression shifted from curiosity to alarm, her instincts telling her that Kane's involvement meant danger, because Kane Ashby, with his history of scheming and betrayal, was never one to play fair, and Diane, who had clawed her way back from her own dark past, recognized the look of a man playing a long con, a man willing to sacrifice others for his own rise. Together, Sally and Diane considered their next move, torn between going directly to Jack, who might overreact and create a rift with Billy, or quietly monitoring Kane until they had enough proof to expose him. And it was this very uncertainty that made Sally's gut twist, because every moment they delayed felt like another step closer to disaster. Meanwhile, Billy was drowning in the rush of his own ambition, spinning fantasies of cornering Victor Newman and finally seizing control of a narrative that had so often left him feeling powerless. But Billy's confidence blinded him to the truth, that Kane was already 3 steps ahead, weaving a web in which Billy was little more than a pawn. And Sally, watching him spiral further into the trap, felt her determination harden, because if she didn't take drastic action now, she might lose Billy forever, whether to Kane's machinations, Victor's retaliation, or the crushing weight of his own hubris. Across town, Chelsea's anxiety only deepened after another tense exchange with Adam, in which he doubled down on his plan and painted her doubts as weakness, telling her that together they could finally take a stand against the Abbotts, finally prove that the Newmans were destined to dominate. And though Chelsea heard the conviction in his voice, she also recognized the recklessness beneath it, a recklessness that mirrored the very same flaws she saw in Billy, the man Adam was so eager to bring down. And it struck her as tragically ironic that both men she had loved were hurtling toward destruction on parallel tracks, with Sally and herself caught in the middle, 2 women who knew the price of unchecked ambition and yet struggled to stop the men they cared for from self-sabotage. Claire, meanwhile, had her own crossroads to navigate, for though Kyle's promises rang hollow in her ears, part of her still wanted to believe in him, to believe that he could grow into the man she needed him to be. But trust was a fragile thing, and Claire refused to let her heart override her judgment. So she set boundaries, told Kyle plainly that his actions would speak louder than words, and reminded him that Holden Novak's presence in her life was not something she would apologize for or change simply to soothe Kyle's insecurities, because if Kyle truly wanted to rebuild, he would have to prove he was capable of respecting her choices. Yet even as she asserted her independence, Claire felt the pull of the Newman legacy, that familiar tug-of-war between personal happiness and family obligation. And she knew that her warning to Kyle was as much about protecting herself as it was about setting the terms of their reconciliation. For Claire Newman was no longer the woman willing to be defined by others. She was carving her own path, and Kyle would either rise to meet her or be left behind. Back in Sally's orbit, her drastic plan began to crystallize, and though she hadn't yet revealed the details to anyone, the spark of determination in her eyes made it clear she was ready to cross lines she had once sworn she'd never cross, because this wasn't just about stopping Kane or reining in Billy. It was about proving that she could stand toe-to-toe with the power players of Genoa City, that Sally Spectra, once dismissed as an outsider, had the grit, cunning, and courage to protect the people she loved even if it meant becoming a target herself. And as Tuesday's show edged closer to its climax, the pieces of the puzzle began aligning in ways no one could have predicted. Adam pressing Chelsea to embrace his vision, Chelsea torn between conscience and loyalty, Sally preparing to detonate her own secret countermeasure, Diane debating whether to side with Sally or alert Jack, Kyle scrambling to prove his sincerity to Claire, and Claire herself balancing on the knife's edge of vulnerability and strength, and through it all, an invisible thread bound them together, the AI program, that ticking time bomb at the center of every conversation, every betrayal, every desperate attempt at control, a piece of technology that symbolized power, temptation, and ruin all at once, and in the end, it would not be Kane or Victor or even Billy who dictated its future, but the ripple effects of choices made in the shadows, choices that Sally, Chelsea, Claire, and Diane were all about to make, choices that would echo through Genoa City long after the credits rolled, leaving viewers on the edge of their seats, wondering not just who would come out on top, but who would survive the fallout when Sally's drastic action collided with Chelsea's disturbing news and set off a chain reaction no one could stop. Sally Spectra barely slept that night, pacing her small apartment as moonlight streaked across the floor, her mind a storm of conflicting loyalties, fears, and strategies, because Chelsea's disturbing revelation about Adam and Victor's interest in the AI program wasn't just unsettling news. It was the match that could ignite an inferno, one that could consume Billy, the Abbotts, and possibly herself in its flames. And while others might freeze under the weight of such a dilemma, Sally thrived in moments where everything was on the line, her past littered with examples of how she'd clawed her way out of impossible corners by refusing to accept defeat. But this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about protecting Billy from Kane's insidious grip and shielding Genoa City from a technological weapon that could be twisted into something far darker than anyone anticipated. Meanwhile, Chelsea sat with her own unease, Adam's words replaying like a haunting melody she couldn't silence. Because though part of her still felt drawn to his vision, the darker part of her recognized the same dangerous glint in his eye that had led them both into ruins before, a reminder of all the times she had believed in Adam's grand schemes only to watch them crumble in ways that left scars she still carried. And now, with Adam aligning himself with Victor and dangling the AI program as the shiny new weapon in their arsenal, Chelsea wondered if she was watching history repeat itself, except this time, the collateral damage wouldn't just be emotional. It could be corporate destruction, reputational ruin, even the destabilization of families who already lived on the knife's edge. Across town, Kyle Abbott found himself staring into a glass of bourbon he didn't really want, hearing Claire Newman's voice in his head, her warning sharp and precise like a blade slicing through his bravado. And though he'd made promises to keep Holden Novak at arm's length and respect Claire's independence, doubt seeped in like poison, whispering questions about whether Claire was truly invested in repairing their fractured relationship or whether Holden had already wormed his way into the place Kyle used to occupy. And as jealousy gnawed at him, Kyle contemplated calling her, barging back into her world to demand answers, but he forced himself to pause, to remember that Claire had explicitly told him actions mattered more than words, so instead he resolved, through clenched teeth, to prove himself by patience, though it felt like swallowing glass. At Abbott Manor, Diane Jenkins Abbott poured herself a late-night drink, Sally's confession still tumbling through her mind like jagged rocks, because the idea of Billy leveraging the AI against Victor seemed absurd enough on its own. But paired with Kane Ashby's hidden agenda, it became downright terrifying, and Diane, with her own checkered past, recognized the pattern. A man drunk on ambition, blinded to the strings being pulled by someone else, and as much as she disliked Sally at times, she couldn't deny that the redhead had a point. This was a recipe for disaster, one that could drag the Abbotts into another scandal, and Diane knew Jack couldn't handle another round of betrayal and chaos so soon after everything they'd already endured. So the question lingered like a shadow, should she tell Jack immediately, risking an eruption between the brothers, or should she play the longer game, aligning herself with Sally to gather evidence before making a move? Sally, meanwhile, was already leaning into her drastic plan, envisioning scenarios in which she might secretly approach Victor himself, using her charm and boldness to expose Kane's manipulation before Billy unknowingly became a pawn in a war he couldn't win. But even as she considered it, the thought of betraying Billy in such a way made her chest ache, because Sally knew that if Billy discovered she had gone behind his back, he might never forgive her, yet the alternative, doing nothing and watching him implode, was far worse, so Sally steeled herself, knowing she was about to gamble her relationship for his life and legacy.